none so accomplished as Mary. Sweet Extras, Book 5, written by Leanie Brown, narrated by Christopher, an authorized voice replica. Chapter 1. Colonel Richard Fitzwilliam straightened his sleeves and lined up the white buttons on his white waistcoat into a neat row, while all the while conducting a rousing discussion inside his head about the futility of attempting to avoid his mother's demands that he marry. It was likely the most interesting debate he was going to have tonight. He was not sure why his mother insisted that he attend these functions, or why his father supported her in her demands. There was no hope of finding a wife, such as he would find worthy of having, amid the music, dancing, and inane topics of discussion ventured upon in a well-decorated setting such as this. He cast a glance around the Bowerman's ballroom. It was brightly lit with a handsome chandelier as the focal point of the lighting scheme. An intricate arabesque design decorated the floor. Floral arrangements and plants were not in short supply. They had spared little expense in preparation for the night. Indeed, it was as opulent a room as one might hope to find on the other end of an invitation, and it appeared that talk about the labour which had gone into the grandeur of the evening would be spread far and wide amongst the people who mattered to a hostess such as Mrs. Bowerman was, for there was a sizable crowd already gathered, and it seemed to grow with each breath he took. Low voices rumbled from here and there, while titters and giggles punctuated the flow of speech in a higher register. Servants scampered as unobtrusively as they could, while still keeping things progressing as they should. He shook his head. For all the preparation that had gone into a night of attempting to marry one's daughter to another's son, he was certain that not one of the ladies present were the sort to eagerly help him ferret out information about a ne'er-do-well. There was far too much lace and too many ruffles for his liking. However, simplicity never seemed to be the height of fashion at one of these events. His lips curled in disgust of their own accord. "Oh, do try to look at least half as pleasant as you normally do," his mother chided him from where she stood at his elbow. "You must marry." "I am still unconvinced that it is a necessity," he retorted. At least, it was not necessary that he tie himself to just any bit of fluff, who could wear a ball gown and remember the steps to a cotillion. "It is as your mother says," his father inserted with a chuckle. "It is best just to accept that she is right and get on with things." They had covered this same vein of thought on the carriage ride to the ball. It was a thought that found him barely catching a growl. He was his own man. He did not need to be ferried around town by his mother, and yet that is precisely what his father had demanded must be done. He pulled his shoulders back, gave a sharp nod of his head to his father, and began his march around the periphery of the ballroom. He would put in a good show of attempting to follow his mother's orders before he sought the refuge of the card room. He was in quite a dour mood this evening. Normally he could tolerate soirees and his mother's prodding with a laugh and a tease, but not tonight. For some reason, the pleasure of seeing and being seen was less inviting than he remembered. It was not that he disliked dancing or merrymaking or being part of society. He sighed. He just did not enjoy it as he used to do. How long had it been since he had found a function such as this to be entertaining? He nodded to a gentleman who acknowledged him by name, but he did not pause his march. He was not going to be knowingly pulled into some trap to see the man's sister married to the second son of Lord Matlock. Now what was he thinking before the interruption? Ah, yes, he had been wondering when he had last enjoyed himself at a ball. It had to have been at Netherfield. There had been a handful of young ladies to entertain and keep safe, a parson whose ridiculousness had been much like a bit of bad theatre, and then there had been a fellow to keep himself from running through. His lips curled upwards as he remembered dragging George Wickham from the dance floor and threatening him most thoroughly if he even approached Georgiana, Richard's cousin and charge. Yes, that had been a most entertaining evening. He sighed, and some of the tension in his shoulders relaxed. If only there was some miscreant to keep watch over tonight. He chuckled softly to himself until he realized that he had almost completed a full circuit of the ballroom. Then his smile faded, and that knot between his shoulder blades returned. He would have to dance at least one set with someone, and the time had come to make a selection. "I say, old man," a familiar voice caught his attention, "you should not come to balls if you do not wish to dance." Richard chuckled and turned to his good friend Will Headley. "For most that is true. However, if your mother is Lady Matlock, you attend whether you wish to or not." Headley clapped him on the shoulder. "You know my sister is in town. Is she? I thought she'd gotten married. His friend nodded. She is here, and so is her betrothed. The wedding will take place at Christmas, since that is when the betrothal was announced, and Lucy thought it would be the height of romance to be married on the same day. He shook his head at the absurdity of such a thought. Females, he said, as if that one word explained everything, and until Richard had stayed at Netherfield almost a year ago now, he would have agreed. Females were odd, he would have said. They did not think as he thought a person should, he would have concurred. But then, he drew a breath and released it slowly. He had met one female, who was not at all as the others seemed to be. I hear your cousin is married, Headley continued. No, she's not married yet, Richard replied, but we are hopeful. Indeed, if Anne were here tonight and so was a certain fellow, there might actually be a bit of fun to be had at this soirée. But the last he'd heard from his mother about his cousin was that she had been sniffling 2 days ago, so it was unlikely that she would be allowed to attend a ball. His companion laughed. I was talking about Darcy. Richard's ears grew warm. Ah, yes. Darcy is married, and happily so. That is the report I have heard. And... His voice trailed off as he nodded toward the door to the ballroom. It appears the reports are true, he concluded in a near whisper. She is lovely. This was said as if it were an afterthought or as something that was not truly supposed to have been said. Richard straightened. Mrs. Darcy is amongst the loveliest ladies I have met. He gave Headley a hard glare for having the audacity to comment on the beauty of his cousin's wife, and then allowed his eyes to finally follow the sightline of his friend. He sucked in a quick breath. Mary, he whispered. What was that? His friend asked. Who is Mary? Only the most interesting female one could ever meet, but that was not what he planned to tell his friend. Miss Bennet is Mrs. Darcy's sister, he said instead. I did not know she was joining them at Darcy House. He frowned. Why would Darcy not tell him that Mary would be visiting? Miss Bennet? Is that the name I should use when asking her for a dance? Headley asked. She's lovely, he chuckled. As is Darcy's wife. But I was not commenting on the beauty of a lady who is already taken. I also have a mother and sister who would like me to marry sooner rather than later. Richard's eyebrows drew together over a scowl. You want to dance with Miss Bennet? What happened to Miss Mullins? Your names were nearly one and the same last season, and still at a house party this past summer from what I have been told. She is not here, the words were said curtly, and we are not married or even betrothed. Therefore I am free to dance with as many pretty young ladies as I wish. Did something go awry? Richard asked as he kept step with his friend. Yes, as a matter of fact it did. Now, if you would do your duty as my friend and introduce me to Miss Bennet, perhaps I can begin a season of putting the past behind me. I am sorry to hear it, Richard whispered, but I will not let you play with Miss Bennet's heart to soothe your own. Headley huffed. I am not the sort of person who plays with hearts. I did not think you were, but you have just suffered a large loss, and as is true in such cases, the mind and heart can be easily swayed. They were mere steps away from Darcy now, so Richard kept his voice low. Headley stopped walking and placed a hand on Richard's arm, drawing his full attention. Is she yours? He whispered. Mine? Mary? He whispered back in surprise. Headley nodded. Richard swallowed and shook his head as he drew a deliberate breath. Then introduce me. Will tipped his head the tiniest bit in the direction of Darcy. Richard turned to look at Mary, who smiled at him. Headley was correct. She looked lovely tonight in her simple lavender gown with only a few touches of lace and no ruffles. Her hair was styled softly and adorned with a small but sparkling comb. She was innocence personified, which he knew was an intoxicating fragrance to many gentlemen. She would not lack for dance partners, that was for certain. Would they not be surprised to discover that while she might look as sweet and docile as any debutante might, she was clever, and not at all without a sharp edge or two? My, she was perfect, was she not? He shook his head and blew out a soft breath. She was not his, but as he prepared to make his friend known to her, something in the vicinity of his heart began to wish that she was. Chapter 2. Good evening, Darcy, Richard said as he approached his relations. I had not thought to see you here tonight. Mother did not mention it. It was strange that she had not, for it would have been an excellent point to be made for why Richard should willingly attend this function. He bowed over Elizabeth's hand and gave Georgiana's cheek a kiss, for which he knew he would likely get scolded later, based on the small sound she made when he did it. Then he turned his attention to Mary. "Miss Bennet, you look charmingly presented this evening. Have you been engaged for the first dance yet?" "We have only just arrived," Darcy answered for her. "Then allow me to be the first to stand up with you." Richard bit back a smile at the huff he heard behind him. "And may I present to you all my friend Mr. Headley?" He looked to Darcy for confirmation that he could proceed. "Mr. Headley," Darcy said, with a tip of his head in greeting, "we are not unacquainted." "Indeed we are not," Headley agreed. "Allow me to offer my warmest congratulations on your good fortune in marrying." "Thank you, and may you do as well as I have." Darcy lifted Elizabeth's hand and kissed it. "This is Mrs. Darcy, and next to her is her sister, Miss Bennet, and mine, Miss Darcy." So much for Richard needing to do any introductions. Darcy seemed set on doing it all himself tonight. "It is a pleasure to meet you all," Headley said. "If it is agreeable to all, could I have the pleasure of dancing the first set with Miss Darcy and the second with Miss Bennet?" Richard bit back a smile as Darcy gave Headley an appraising look before turning to Georgiana. "The decision is yours," he said simply. "I would be happy to have the first set settled so easily. Thank you, Mr. Headley." Georgiana's smile was just wide enough to show pleasure without being too encouraging. Richard had heard his mother instructing her on this very expression. "And Miss Mary?" "Will you stand up with me first and Headley second?" Richard asked. "He is your friend?" she whispered. "Yes." "Then I would be happy to be partnered by you for my second set, Mr. Headley." Headley looked a trifle taken aback by the need for confirmation that he could be trusted, but he smiled and offered his thanks. Then he extended a hand to Georgie and led her towards where the dancers were beginning to set themselves for the first dances. "And does that mean that you are also willing to dance this set with me?" Richard teased Mary, who chuckled before replying. "It seems I must. However, I do not wish to be left without a partner, because you have decided that Mr. Headley has said something to Miss Darcy of which you do not approve." She arched one eyebrow over a rather severe look. "I cannot promise it. You will have to take your chances that my friend is a true friend and not a fiend in need of remonstration." She sighed loudly. "I suppose that is the best for which I can hope, is it not?" "Indeed it is," Darcy muttered. While his words sounded like a grumble, his expression was one of amusement. "Have you seen Bingley yet?" he asked. "No, I did not know he was planning to be here either." There seemed to be much that his mother had not deigned to share with him, about who might or might not be in attendance at this event, unless— "Did my mother know that you and Bingley would be here tonight?" Darcy shrugged. "I assumed your father would have told her. I know I spoke to him about it the day before last when he called at Darcy House. Why do you ask?" "It is for no particular reason, other than to wonder why she did not use this bit of information when badgering me into accepting the invitation to this soirée." "Why did you not wish to attend?" Mary asked as she placed her hand in his. "It is a beautiful ballroom, and there are so many people here. I am sure you must know many of those who are in attendance." "Yes," Darcy inserted in a rather teasing tone. "Why did you not wish to attend? You like seeing and being seen. You are married." He gave his cousin a pointed look. "Therefore my mother is no longer attempting to arrange things for you. However, it was not that long ago when she was. Surely you remember how it was to be constantly reminded of your duty to the family." He sighed. "And because you are married, there are fewer unwed gentlemen in our family, upon whom she feels it her obligation to pour her attention." Darcy chuckled. "By fewer you mean one. You?" "Precisely," Richard agreed. "I do not need help selecting a wife, if I decide I wish for one, that is." "Are you still set against marrying?" Mary's question was spoken in her inquisitive way, as one who truly wished to understand what was being said. "I have never been set against it," Richard admitted. "I have only ever been set against being forced, manipulated, or coerced into such a permanent status. I would prefer to choose when to, as well as whom to marry." "That seems reasonable. I felt the same way about my mother's machinations. You remember, of course, that last year at this time my mother was attempting to put me forward." Here she smiled cunningly. Did he remember? Oh, he most certainly remembered, for he was the gentleman toward whom Miss Mary was being pushed. "I do not wish to be forced upon any man," she continued. "I would prefer to be selected by my husband willingly, and because he found something about me that was irresistible. Even if I found the object of my mother's scheming to be worthy of notice, I would still refuse him, unless he sought me of his own accord. He reluctantly let go of her hand as she took her place across from him in the line of dancers. "Then, we are agreed," he said. "We both wish to find mutual affection." "That is exactly what I am saying." His head tipped and his brow furrowed. Her words did not match the way she nearly rolled her eyes at him. Was there more to what she had said? Had he missed a clue? She was very good at inserting little bits of information that could be overlooked quite easily, unless someone were looking for it. If it were not for the dance beginning, he would have replayed her words in his mind immediately, but his focus was needed elsewhere. So he tucked it away for when the dance no longer required his concentration. This was how it always was for him. The first few steps of any dance demanded recollection, but as soon as his feet knew the pattern they were to follow, then his mind would be free to think and converse quite readily. "How long have you known Mr. Headley?" Mary asked as their hands met. "Since I was a boy in school." The dance took them apart from each other for a few steps. "We were not close friends, but rather only knew of one another," he added when they were once again reunited. "We have come to know each other much better over the past few years of being at soirees. He's a member of the lower house, so that is important to my father." "He is in Parliament?" There was an eagerness to her tone that made Richard scowl. "Yes, and he has been for a couple of years now." "Then he owns land?" "Yes, he inherited an estate from his father 3 years ago." "Oh, well, that is sad, but it is how things are, is it not?" The dance parted them again. "Is it a large estate?" she asked when their hands joined next. "It is not overly large." "And is he looking for a wife?" "I believe he is, although I had thought that he had found one last year." Her eyes lit with true interest. "Is that so? What happened?" "I do not know," though he was likely as interested in the answer to that as she appeared to be. "Is that other fellow here?" she whispered. Richard's brow creased in confusion. "Other fellow? Which other fellow?" "The one whom a certain ne'er-do-well wished to help for a fee." "Ah, yes, Mr. Wellham, that other fellow." "Does it matter since Anne is not here?" She shook her head and gave him a look that told him clearly that he was not thinking as he should. "I would like to see him, and since I'm in town perhaps I can help you." She left the part about what she could help him with unspoken, but he knew precisely what she meant. Mr. Wellham had not yet made an offer for Anne as expected. "I am not sure how you can help, but I would be willing to discuss it." Her whole expression lit with delight. "I'm to visit my aunt and uncle tomorrow. They are actually rather sorry that I am not staying with them for this visit, but they do understand that spending time with Miss Darcy will better my chances of making a match." "Indeed? Have you come to town to find a husband?" She had seemed so set against the idea last year. In fact, she had refused to fall victim to any of her mother's or sister's stratagems. It had been rather entertaining to watch, and it had made his job of avoiding the matchmaking efforts of Georgiana and Bingley rather easy. "Why else would I be here?" she asked as they returned to their spots to end the dance with the appropriate bows and curtsies. "We should discuss that as well when you call on me." He blinked. "Do you mean that we should discuss how you will find a husband?" She nodded. "Perhaps not how, but who. If a gentleman is a friend of yours, I will know he is a good person to consider." Her eyes flicked down the row to where he knew Headley was standing. "I am certain your mother would approve of him," he said with a tip of his head in Headley's direction. "I can put you forward to him in her stead if you wish." Even to him his words sounded clipped and not altogether friendly. Her eyes narrowed. "Are you trying to dissuade me from pursuing him by pushing me towards him?" His brow furrowed. Was that what he was doing? "Are you?" she asked him again. He gave her a sheepish smile before admitting, "I am not entirely certain." Chapter 3. "I met Mr. Headley on my way in," Richard said as he took a seat in Darcy's sitting room the following day. He had come to call on Mary, but he knew both from what he had been told by the butler and by Mary last night that she would not be here. Unfortunately, he had neglected to obtain from her the address for where she would be, and that was his true reason for being in this chair, in this sitting room, at this moment. Of course, he wasn't about to tell anyone that. His feelings regarding Miss Mary Bennet were still not entirely sorted out in his own mind, but there was just something about her that drew him to her, and so, again, Here he was. "Oh, he's a pleasant gentleman," Anne said, "and quite handsome." Here she shared a smile with Georgiana. "Is he?" "I truly had not noticed," Richard replied. He had also never heard Anne speak about handsome men until last season. It still seemed strange to hear. Anne giggled. Giggled! Would he ever get used to that sound? The Anne who had arrived in town was certainly not the same Anne he had always known at Rosings. "Do you agree with our cousin?" he asked Georgiana. "Have you come to interrogate me about all the gentlemen I danced with last night?" she replied. "No, just the handsome ones who are my friends." "I did not say Mr. Headley was handsome," she argued, as a bit of pink stained her cheeks. "You also did not say he was not handsome," Richard countered. "And you are my charge, so I must know if there is a reason why I should consider my friend differently than I currently do." He arched an eyebrow over a pointed look. "He is handsome, and if you must know, he is quite pleasant. But—" she glanced uneasily at Anne. "He is a bit older than what I would prefer. However, age does not disqualify immediately," she added quickly. "It is just that—" "You and her brother have held the place of her father for several years now," Anne inserted, "and since Mr. Headley is the same age as you, it is hard to not think of him as old. That being said, I do not find him old at all," she smiled at Richard. "I am certain he would not care for a lady like me, but I would not be opposed to him doing so." "I will keep that in mind," Richard assured her. "You should know, however, that he was just recently treated poorly from what I've gathered, though I do not know the details." "Oh my, yes," Anne cried. "It was quite the ordeal." Richard's brow furrowed. "Do you know what happened then?" "We do," Georgiana replied. "However, we're not to mention it to anyone. Mary thought it best if we knew." Richard blinked. "Mary knows what happened?" That was startling. Georgiana nodded. "I dare say he was quite taken with her last night," Anne said. "Not that I was there. I am only sharing what I have learned today." "Do you think so?" Richard asked Georgiana. "I most certainly do." He scowled. In his opinion, Mary and Headley were an ill-matched pair. Not that he found his friend lacking in any significant way, only in the area of being a good match for Mary. "And? Was she taken with him?" "I do not believe so," Georgiana replied. "Oh, indeed," cried Anne. "I think her heart has been engaged elsewhere." "You do?" This was as shocking, if not more so, than the fact that Mary knew what his friend had suffered, before he had even had time to discover that bit of information himself. "I am positively certain of it, but I am not one to tell tales when I have not been given permission to do so. In that, I am very unlike my mother." Anne pressed her lips tightly together and shook her head while her eyes sparkled with humour. Her eyes sparkled. Again Richard was struck with how this Anne was so different from the Anne he had always known. "That is why it is likely best that she was not here to entertain callers today," Georgiana added. "She is at her aunt and uncle's home near Cheapside for the day. We're going to join her there for dinner." Richard looked at Anne. "Are you going to dinner with Mary's aunt and uncle?" Anne laughed. "Goodness, no. My mother would have an apoplexy. If I were to dine at the house of a tradesman, it is just Georgie and her brother and sister who are going." "That does make sense." He leaned back in his chair and crossed his ankles in front of him. "How close to Cheapside is it?" "It is on Gracechurch Street." Georgie's brow furrowed. "Number 18, I believe, and I have heard it is quite a nice home. Her Uncle Gardner is not without a fortune." "You will have to tell me all about it," Anne inserted eagerly. "I am sure I would like to see where a wealthy tradesman lives. Do you suppose he knows of any other rich tradesmen who would like to gain an estate when they marry? I am to inherit at some point, you know, though I doubt I wish to live at Rosings with my mother all my life. I do love her. Don't get me wrong, but I dare say she will drive a wedge between me and whomever I marry." "Unless he's a man of means himself, and possesses a firm temperament," Richard added to this excessively interesting and revealing discussion. "Which is why Darcy would not do," Anne muttered. "Very true," Georgiana concurred, "except, of course, if he had loved me like he loves Elizabeth." Anne sighed. "But he never did, and I knew it. I was not surprised that he refused to honour that document which Mother found. One day I will repay him for doing so, and being forced to fund my adventures in town. I am not so close-fisted as my mother." There was a cat who had lapped up a full bowl of cream quality to her smile that made Richard pause. Was there something that his cousin was not telling him? He tipped his head and studied her. "You seem very different from how I have always known you to be," he said. She directed her eyes to her hands as they smoothed her skirt. I assure you that I have always been who I am. It is just that I am in a more invigorating environment than Rosings. Home is rather dull, and so it forces one to also be dull. Even you are not as outgoing when you come to visit as you have been when I have seen you at Matlock or Pemberley." It was true that there was an austere atmosphere at Rosings. She lifted her eyes to him. "It is my mother's doing. I am certain of it, which is why—" She pressed her lips together and her eyes grew wide. "Which is why—" "What?" Richard pressed. He watched her visibly relax as her lips curled upward. "Which is why I am so different in town. My mother is here to be sure, but she's not by my side at every moment. I can visit here and go there without her on occasion. I rarely get to do any of that at home. Why would I? Who would I go visit on my own? The only people of my station happen to be friends of my mother," she sighed, "and very few of them ever have any truly interesting or handsome guests." She straightened her shoulders. "I do call on those beneath me, but there is little hope of forming any true friendship with such people. Mother would not allow it." Curiously, her cheeks grew rosy at this admission. "Am I to gather from all of this that you were not injured in any way by Darcy's refusal and your need to find a husband elsewhere?" She blinked and looked at him as if he were a child who had just announced that the grass was green, as if it were a new concept that none but he knew. "I am not injured in any fashion, other than I am a good deal older than most debutantes, and I do lay part of the blame for that at Darcy's feet. Had he found a lady to marry sooner, I could have come to town when I was far less of a spinster." "You are not a spinster," Georgiana cried. "I am nearly on the shelf, though I do not plan to actually be placed there." She patted Georgiana's hand. "I will marry someone." "Is there anyone in particular who has caught your eye?" Richard asked. She shook her head and sighed. There was a great deal of weight in that exhalation. "You know about the few that called more than once last season, and sadly, I have not yet added any new names to my list this season." "Not even Mr. Headley?" "I am afraid not, and that is quite disappointing, for I would dearly love to add him, but I cannot while his heart is still uncertain of what it wants. Added to that, I have not seen him with Mother. I thought you seemed to prefer Mr. Welham last season, and Mr. Welham had preferred her enough to make a deal with a scoundrel. Fortunately, that ne'er-do-well had already been paid for his part in the matchmaking scheme that Richard had discovered when in Hertfordshire a year ago. He has not called, nor have I seen him yet this season, though to be fair, the season has only just begun. That being said, I find his lack of desire to see me as soon as possible to be a mark against him. But that is enough talk about me. I want to know who you intend to marry." "Me?" Richard asked in surprise. "Has my mother been here? Is there something I should know?" Anne giggled. "No, neither of our mothers have made an appearance today, but you're not getting any younger, and I hear you danced with several young ladies last night." Richard looked at Georgiana. Had she been sharing stories about him? "Oh, it was not me who told her, it was Mary." "But she could not tell me if any of them had caught your eye," Anne added. "I was there, because my mother demanded that I be there. Of course, I danced often. You are not the only one with a demanding mother." Anne and Georgiana laughed at that. "But did anyone in particular catch your eye?" Anne asked. Richard shook his head. "None?" Georgiana asked incredulously. He shrugged. There had been one lady, the same lady who had filled his mind ever since he had met her in Hertfordshire. "Perhaps one," he admitted, which caused both his cousins' expressions to be suffused with excitement. "However," he continued, "I prefer to keep my counsel on that for now, for I am uncertain how she feels about me. I'm sure you ladies can appreciate that." He pushed up from where he sat as they agreed that they could understand his position. "Are you leaving already?" Georgie asked. "I am. There are others on whom I need to call." He bent and gave her a quick hug and peck on the cheek. She pressed a slip of paper into his hand. "I should not say it," she whispered, "but I doubt you will be disappointed. I saw the way every lady who danced with you was charmed." "You're too generous," he teased as he turned to leave. "No, I am not. You're adored by more than just me," she called after him. He chuckled while he shook his head at her reply as he opened the note she'd given him. It read, "Please call on me at 18 Gracechurch Street. M.B." Mary had known he would come looking for her. He shook his head again and turned back to Georgiana with a questioning look. She only shrugged and smiled a knowing smile. Did this mean that her comment from before meant he would not be cast aside by Mary? And if she did, then had Mary said something to her? Or was she just surmising? "Oh, Colonel," Elizabeth said as she descended the stairs behind him. "Are you leaving?" Have I missed the best call of the day? He smiled. It appears you have. She peeked at the missive in his hand. Well then, I suppose I will have to be satisfied to dine with you. She placed a hand on his arm. Do say yes when my aunt asks you to join us. You expect your aunt to invite me to dinner? Did everyone know more than he did today? I would be thoroughly disappointed and shocked beyond recovery if she did not. He chuckled. Then I shall prepare my acceptance speech on the way. Chapter 4. Colonel Fitzwilliam was just dismounting his horse in front of number 18 Gracechurch Street when the door to the house opened and Will Headley exited. He smiled and tipped his hat to Richard. It seems we're of the same mind today, he said. Richard forced his lips to not form a scowl. What was the chap doing here? Or perhaps Miss Bennet left a message for you to call on her here, Headley continued. This caused a furrow to form between Richard's eyes. Did you receive one? Headley nodded. I did. So it was not just he who had been asked to call on her. The thought settled uneasily upon him, causing disappointment to spring forth in his mind. Have there been any other gents who have come to call? He asked. Headley chuckled. To my knowledge, no. It is just you and I so far. Richard turned and looked up the street as he wondered how many messages Mary had left with Georgiana, and whether his sweet youngest cousin had encouraged each and every gentleman, as she had him. Had they all been told that they would not be disappointed? Was Georgiana playing at some scheme, or was it Mary? And if so, what sort of ruse was it? Is something wrong? Are you waiting for someone to join you? Headley had turned to look up the street with Richard. No, I was merely thinking about my cousins. Oh. The word was said as if the answer had done nothing to clear up Headley's confusion about why Richard was looking up the street. Miss Bennet was just going to read a story to one of her cousins when I took my leave, he continued. I did not see them, but her description of them was enchanting. Enchanting? Richard parroted. Quite, and her willingness to spend time with them is a decided mark in her favour, as a possible replacement for what I had expected to have. A replacement? He levelled a displeased look at his friend. One does not simply replace one lady with an acceptable substitute like one does a pair of shoes or trousers. Headley held up his hands as if warding off an attack. I didn't mean it that way. I meant that what I expected to be is no more, and so I must get on with my life. And getting on with it alongside a lady as lovely and caring as Miss Bennet would be an excellent way to not regret how I have been treated. Richard folded his arms. And exactly how have you been treated? Abominably. I dare not say more than that at present. Why? Headley looked toward the cloudless sky and shook his head. While the lady whom I loved may not have loved me as I loved her, I refuse to be the source of society thinking ill of her. For now it is enough that they know that what was hoped for on my part was not realized, and that it is not of my own doing. You know that I do not spread secrets, Richard said. Yes, I do know that. But... Headley's cheeks puffed out as he shook his head. There was an indiscretion at a house party, and she married another because it was necessary. He arched an eyebrow over a speaking look. She will be a mother before spring. Richard did not know what to say to such a revelation other than, I am sorry to hear it. Of course, I will not say a word. Thank you. Headley blew out a breath. This is why I must find a new future. A better one, Richard added as he clapped his friend on the shoulder. Headley nodded his head slowly. That is for what I hope. There is no rush, Richard continued. Give your heart time to heal. Are you attempting to shoo me away from Miss Bennet and your cousin? Was he? Why, yes, he suspected he was, at least in part. Not completely, I suppose. I would just prefer for you to be more certain of what you want before either lady's heart is engaged. That is sound advice, my friend. However, I find I need to discover the truth of where my heart lies through action. He made to mount his horse. Miss Bennet intrigues me, and so does Mr. Boor, though I do realise I must discover the issue with her mother before I can be more than just curious where she's concerned. Yes, there is that. Richard put a hand on Headley's horse's neck and stroked it gently. How are you set financially and all that? Quite well. I have an estate and a good income from it. Good. And how are you at standing your ground when ridiculous demands are made of you? You do remember my grandmother, do you not? God rest her soul. I do indeed. He very well remembered a little lady with a fiery temper who had come to call on Headley, back when they were in school, Apparently she had heard that he was ill, and did not think he could recover without her concoctions. I had nearly forgotten about her. She will never be forgotten in our family, Will replied with a chuckle. Tales of her temerity will live for generations. Then I do not fear for you in meeting my aunt. He gave Headley's horse a pat. Perhaps in a day or two we could meet for a game of some sort at our club or Angelo's. I look forward to it. And with that he departed while Richard moved to knock on the gardener's door. Good day, Colonel, Mrs. Gardiner greeted him as he entered her sitting room. You're rather early for dinner, are you not? There was a twinkle of barely concealed mirth in her eyes. Indeed I am. However, I have not been invited to dinner. He held up a finger to indicate that he had more to say on the matter. That being said, I have been instructed to not refuse an offer should one be made. Mrs. Gardiner laughed. Ah, my Lizzie knows me too well. We would be honoured to have you join us for dinner, sir. Thank you, madame. I assure you that I'm not planning to stay from now until dinner time. I do know proper decorum. He settled into a chair. Not that I always let on that I know it. He grinned while she chuckled at him. I understand from Mr. Headley, he continued, that Miss Mary is with the children. Ah, did you see him on his way out? Richard gave a nod of his head. He is a lovely man. You have very good taste in friends. It is not every gentleman who will venture into the trade district to call on a lady at her uncle's home, which is within view of his warehouses. She took up her knitting. You appear to be at ease here as well. I have no reason not to be. As long as the owner of a house is upstanding, I find no reason to not enter and partake of the society within, and if the owner is not honourable, no matter the level of standing ascribed to him by the beau monde, he will not receive my acceptance of any invitations for intimate discourse. It is the character of a man that makes him, not his standing. However, as you know, there are members of my own family who would disagree, with great force, with what I have just said. Mrs. Gardiner paused the clicking of her needles. And how do you feel about that? He blew out a breath. I would like to employ some methods to force them to be reasonable, but that would not truly solve the problem now, would it? No, it would not, but it does state your dissatisfaction quite clearly. She returned to her knitting, while he took in the decor of the room, letting his eyes fall on the furniture, the flooring, the walls, and the art. It was tasteful, and spoke of wealth that was not on display, but merely part of living. You decorate like I prefer, he said when he noted Mrs. Gardiner watching him. And how is that? Properly, he said with a smile. She shook her head and laughed. I would agree that this room is very properly done in my opinion as well. But do our definitions of properly match? Richard shrugged. That is up to you to decide. If I were to describe this room, which is how I believe proper decoration is done, I would say, it is not sparse, nor is it elaborately ornate, but these pieces were not without significant outlay of funds, and they fill just enough of the space, and possess just enough colour to be neither dull nor jarring. You do have a keen eye and a pointed way of saying things that cuts to the matter at hand. I appreciate that. And I do believe we agree upon the definition of properly done when it comes to decor. What else do I need to know about you, Colonel? I would not have my niece entering into a friendship with the wrong sort of fellow. I believe your niece is incapable of forming a friendship with the wrong sort of person, be they male or female. She has a lively mind. Perhaps not so lively as our Lizzie, but you are not wrong. Nevertheless, she is not without fault, and you are a handsome man with a noble profession and an easy manner. Even the most astute young lady could be swayed by a charming gentleman with a red coat. He shook his head. I am tolerable at best, but I thank you for your generosity. I know handsome when I see it, Colonel. My eyesight is quite good, even if I am married. She winked at him and chuckled. Again, I thank you. However, in our family I am average, not overly tall, not overly handsome, not overly anything, except straightforward and bound to act promptly, though not without thought. I just tend to assess quickly and proceed. That sounds a great deal like my husband, Mrs. Gardiner replied. I can fully understand why Mary likes you as she does. You seem very sure of yourself. His head tipped of its own accord. Mary liked him. How precisely did she like him? Was her aunt speaking just of Mary being his friend? Or was there more to the comment? In most things, he muttered. Except it seemed when it came to ladies like Mary. There his confidence seemed quite unsure of itself. Oh, Colonel, that very lady said as she entered the sitting room. Did you receive my message? Her smile was a lovely sight. I did. As he rose to greet her, he pulled out the paper Georgiana had given him. How many of these did you write? What do you mean, how many? I only wrote that one for you. He met Mr. Headley on his way in, my dear, her aunt said. I see. I only wrote one for him as well. Her eyes challenged him to ask further about the notes she had written. He would not disappoint her. And did you write only one for many other gentlemen? He retook his seat when she took the one next to him. I wrote 4 such notes, though all had different messages. Yours is the only one that was written so familiarly as it was, because we are friends and relations of long standing now. Any other gentleman is just an acquaintance, but it did seem like a good way to conduct a Gideon test. Richard's brow furrowed. What, pray tell, is a Gideon test? Is this a way of flinging a fleece on the ground to see if it gets wet or stays dry? She chuckled softly. No, it is more of a go home if you're scared, or a you do not qualify if you do not drink correctly sort of test. He shook his head. I still do not understand. If you recall the story from the Bible, which I assume you do since you mentioned a fleece, Mary began, both narrowed the number of gentlemen who would be best for Gideon's army. And no, before you say it, I am not forming an army. However, if a gentleman is not willing to call on me at my aunt and uncle's house in Gracechurch Street, that does save me the bother of having to get to know him, for any such gentleman simply will not do. Richard's head bobbed up and down as a smile curled his lips. She was clever in a way that was uniquely Miss Mary Bennet. I am impressed. It is a good plan. I am capable of them, she teased. Yes, I do know that. I would not have gotten the information about who had created those papers my aunt found, if it had not been for your plan. Her brow furrowed and she scowled softly. What? Have I said something wrong? No, she replied, but I believe we have not discovered all there is to know about that. Chapter 5. What did she mean they had not discovered all there was to know about the betrothal papers on which Wickham had forged the signatures of Darcy and his father? After a few rounds of cards, during which Wickham had lost every hand he played, he had quite willingly written and signed a confession for his part in the scheme, and had named his co-conspirator. That confession was currently under lock and key, providing the security needed to make sure Wickham was no longer a problem. Do you mean to tell me that I paid that bothersome miscreant's gambling debts, and only received a partial truth from the man in return? Mary shook her head. No, I do not believe you were taken advantage of by Mr. Wickham, for I do not believe he knew all the details involved in the scheme to which he was party. There was an eagerness to her whispered answer. Richard's brow furrowed. That was somewhat mollifying, but a few more details were needed. Go on. What have you discovered? He loved that she was as fascinated by a good intrigue as he was. Well, I'm not entirely certain, so do not take this as proof of anything more than my suspicion. It was just something that your cousin said which made me think she knew more about what was happening when Lady Catherine arrived at Longbourn with those papers than any of us would likely expect. Do you mean my cousin Anne? Surely it was Anne about whom she spoke, and not Georgiana. Yes. Are you saying that Anne is somehow entangled in this? That is what I suspect. How intriguing. What did she say? Perhaps I can help you decipher this riddle. Mary leaned towards him. Her whole being seemed to be enraptured with this intrigue. She had been the same about figuring out how Lady Catherine had discovered those papers, back when he was pondering it at Netherfield last year. Indeed, it was what had laid the foundation upon which their friendship had been established, and had endeared her to him. It was rare to find another person, most especially a lady, who found solving riddles to be so all-encompassingly delightful as he did. She said something about it being quite the spectacle, which was well worth the cost, and then she stumbled on her words and hurried to add, of the trip from Rosings. But I do not believe that that was what she originally was thinking to say. Lydia does the same thing when she nearly shares a secret. She will be half through the telling before she realises what she has said, and there are several things about Mr. Bourg that remind me of Lydia. There are? He could not say that he had even considered that there might be a similarity between his cousin and the youngest Bennet. Oh, yes. Have you ever seen your cousin prepare her tea? She puts the milk in first and then the sugar. Lydia does that as well. And then she has this small secretive smile that causes her left eyebrow to flick up as if she's thinking about some grand scheme. Lydia does the very same thing after she has managed to manipulate her way into getting what she wants. Richard's eyebrows rose, and his lips turned down as he thought about that. Yes, yes. He had noticed those things about Anne, but he had not paid close enough attention to Mary's sister to make the connection between the two. "Come to think of it," he said, "there were a couple of moments during my discussion with her about being different here in town compared to Rosings, as well as finding a suitable match, where she displayed anxious behaviour, smoothing her skirt, lowering her eyes, and blushing." He cocked his head to the side as he looked to Mary. "Do you truly think she had a part to play in this?" Mary's shoulders lifted and lowered. "Perhaps." Richard sank back in his chair and scratched his chin. "Do you have any suggestions for how we might discover the truth of the matter?" "Beyond speaking with Mr. Welham? No, I do not." "Beyond speaking with Mr. Welham?" Richard repeated. "What about asking Anne directly?" Mary huffed and shook her head as if he had asked the most absurd thing. "If she is like Lydia, that is one tactic which will most decidedly not work. I am sure bits and pieces of information could be gleaned over the course of a few well-directed conversations, but we would still be left with the task of deciphering if we were discovering the truth, or only what we surmise to be the truth. That is why I postulate that the only sure way to learn what we need to know is to speak with Mr. Welham." Her gaze darted toward her aunt. "Do you happen to know if Mr. Welham is attending the theatre tomorrow? For we are." "You are? And Darcy did not invite me?" "I really do not know who Mr. Darcy invited to join us other than Anne and her mother." Richard blinked. "He invited Lady Catherine." "He had to. How else could he invite Anne to join us?" That was true. It was unlikely that Anne would have been allowed to attend without her mother. Could he not have just invited Mrs. Jenkinson? Mary chuckled. "Would that not be a rather large snub to your aunt?" "Perhaps, but the company would be far more enjoyable." "Then maybe that is why Mr. Darcy has not invited you. Maybe he wishes to spare you the discomfort of having to endure your aunt." She gave him a sly smile. "Would you like me to tell Elizabeth that you would like to come and that you would enjoy it if Mrs. Jenkinson were also there? I had thought she was a bit too old for you, but—" Richard shook his head and laughed. "No, I'm not trying to match myself with Anne's companion." "That is too bad." There was that lovely sardonic tone that he rather enjoyed when she used it. "She's a very nice lady." "She is that. I will not disagree with you, but she has not captured my heart." He made sure to say this with as much sorrow as he could, and then dramatically placed his hand over where that beating organ lay within his chest. It drew out a laugh from Mary as it was intended to do. "What about you?" he continued. "Will you be hoping to see Mr. Headley at the theatre?" Her eyes lowered and her cheeks grew rosy. "He is a very nice gentleman." "I would have to agree since he is my friend, but that does not answer my question." "No," she replied, while holding his gaze with her own. "It does not, but that is as much of an answer as I am willing to give at this time." It was the sort of answer that caused him to scowl without so much of a thought passing through his mind first. It was also the sort of answer that threw a cold wet blanket over the sparking embers of friendship without pretense which had settled into the room up until now. "He would not be a bad choice," he said coolly. "However, he is still sorting out his own heart, as I am sure you are aware." "I am." He glanced at the clock that stood on the table near her aunt. "I suppose that is where we should leave things if I wish to be welcomed back for dinner." Not that he currently wished to dine at the gardener's. It was strange how his delight from being asked to join them from just a few moments ago had flown completely away. Mary put a hand on his arm before he could rise to take his leave. "I look forward to your return." The look which she wore asked if he was well. "Do you?" he asked softly. "Yes," was her simple reply. "Why?" He swallowed as she studied his face for a tortuously long moment. "It is because I enjoy your company, sir." "More than any others?" The words were on his tongue, but he would not ask them. Instead, he pushed them aside and replied, "And I enjoy yours, Miss Mary." His chest felt tight, and his heart was suddenly galloping along. She smiled, though it was somewhat guarded, and not an expression that enveloped all her features. "I have noticed there are many things on which we are agreed. I am happy to know that spending time with one another is among them, just as I suspected it was." He rose. "I will see if I can track down Mr. Welham and discover his plans, to see when his path and ours might cross, unless you prefer that I just ask him what we wish to know." "That is entirely up to you." He shook his head. "No, it is not. We started the unravelling of this scheme together. I would not wish to deny you the pleasure of interrogating the man if that is what you wish." "You would defer to me?" She took his arm and started walking toward the door with him. Always, the word was out of his mouth in an instant, and it was true, so utterly and completely true. He would always be hers. In that case, allow me to clarify your assignment, Colonel. He chuckled. How his men would laugh to hear him taking orders from a pretty young lady who looked as sweet as Mary did. Of course, they did not know the fierce woman who sat quietly behind that charming facade. If the opportunity to gather the information we need presents itself, feel free to ask. For to tell the truth, I am eager to know. This time, the smile with which she favoured him permeated every part of her features. Again, we're agreed, he said, before lifting her hand to his lips and giving it a kiss. It was an action that he hoped she understood moved their friendship firmly into something more. Until tonight. Her eyes twinkled and a soft, pleased smile lay in them, as well as on her lips. I will be waiting and pondering our puzzle. Do not be late. Never, he said as he placed his hat on his head and set out to find Mr. Welham. Chapter 6. A glance at his pocket watch let Richard know that he only had 1 hour left to find Welham, and discover what was being hidden. If he were to be out searching longer than that, he would not have time to dress for dinner and arrive at Gracechurch Street on time. He most certainly did not wish to be late to his appointment to see Mary. But he also did not wish to return to her without the information she was awaiting. Either of those two things would mean he had failed her in some way, and he was not in the habit of being unsuccessful in a mission. Of course, this was the first time his orders had come from such an intriguing and pretty source that stirred his heart in a particularly welcome way. He turned his horse and began making his way back down Rotten Row. Welham should be here. Where was he? He touched his hat in acknowledgement of a greeting, then turned his eyes back to surveying his surroundings for his quarry. He had missed finding Welham at the club where his butler had said he would be, all because his mother, Lady Matlock, had seen him on his way to that club and had stopped him because she simply had to have his opinion on something. It was a rare occurrence. Most days he only had to reply to a missive that his mother sent, if he had to reply to anything from her at all. But not today. No. Today he had been in the wrong place at the wrong time and had been required to congratulate her on her new hat. She did like new hats. It would likely mean that before long she would soon be requiring a new pelisse or dress, perhaps both, to set it off just so. Do my eyes deceive me, or is that truly Colonel Fitzwilliam? Fancy finding you here. This makes 3 times seeing each other in one day. Do you plan to be at the Clark's dinner party this evening as well? For if you are, we could make a full day of it. Will Headley, wearing a look of amusement, drew alongside him. It is a beautiful day for a ride, is it not? Indeed it is, and no, I do not plan to attend that particular dinner party. That sounds as if you have a different dinner to attend. I do, he cast a sidelong look at his friend, with Miss Bennet. The right side of Will's mouth tipped into a half-smile. That was not the expression Richard would have given if he had just heard that the lady he was interested in was dining with some other gentleman. I believe I asked at the Bowman's ball if she was your lady, and you said no. His friend looked pointedly at him. I believe you lied. He held up a hand to forestall Richard's protest. Oh, I do not believe you lied purposefully. I believe you had not cottoned on to the fact at the time. Why else would you have insisted upon dancing with her before me? I know you can be a bit of a troublesome fellow for the sport of it, but there seemed to be an urgency to your conniving to get that first dance. Then you called at Darcy House and the gardener's, and as I pondered things of the heart this afternoon, the pieces fell into place. Richard blew out a soft breath. Then, you likely discovered it just a few hours after I did. Headley chuckled. You have helped me sort some things out. Have I? He nodded. I think that what has befallen you with Miss Bennet is what was missing in my former relationship. There was no falling into it. There was no wonder about how emotions had been stirred and entangled. There was just a progression from what was expected to what was supposed to have been. I do not doubt that my heart was engaged, but I also am not certain it was as engaged as it should have been. Many find happiness in such a fashion, Richard countered. Not all marriages of advantage deteriorate into facades of contentment. There are those where each party steadily grows in fondness for one another, and the result is something quite happy. I will not disagree. However, I do think I would rather find something more than that. He cast a look in Richard's direction. Perhaps with your cousin? Richard blinked. Truly? Anne? Headley nodded. I'm not saying I'm smitten with her at present, for what does that even mean? I'm not sure that I know, but she does intrigue me." Again his lips tipped up into a half-smile. "Despite the reports I have heard about her mother." He leaned toward Richard. "I did some asking today. There was a fellow, a Mr. Wellam, who assured me that her mother was indeed a wall of disapproval of most all things, and the key to making progress in a happy fashion." "Wellam, you say?" "Yes. Do you know him?" Richard nodded. "He called on Anne several times last season, but has not sought her out since her arrival in town. I was actually looking for him, to ask him about it." Well, that was not precisely why he was looking for Wellam, but he likely would have begun his conversation there, before attempting to find out what he truly wanted to know. "That is unfortunate. Why?" "He said he was planning to return home for a day or two. I believe his estate is in Kent, nearer to the sea than town, but you likely know that if you are familiar with him. There was some matter of improvement being done that required he oversee its beginning. Apparently he came into some money last year so that he could complete his plans to make the changes needed." "Did he say when he was leaving?" Richard asked, causing his friend to look at him in confusion. I had hoped to put Anne's mind at ease about whether she should hold out hope for him or not. This caused Headley's brow to furrow. She did not seem ill at ease when I spoke with her. She seemed very open to receiving calls. In fact, she mentioned looking forward to making many new acquaintances this season. "Did she?" "Yes. It is why I decided to see where the friendship may lead." That made sense. Headley had always been a bit of a cautious fellow, who took time forming his opinion and setting out on a plan of action. Anne would do well with him, as long as Headley could withstand the forces of her mother. "You are truly resolved about discovering how you and Anne and her mother would get on?" Headley chuckled. "I have set my mind to it. And you will remember that I have been your friend for several years. You're not the easiest fellow to get along with at times. That, when coupled with my demanding grandmother, have prepared me well enough to attempt the feat with the confidence that I could be successful." It was true. He was a trial at times, for he had inherited his father's recalcitrant tendencies about his plans being followed. It was a boon to him as a colonel, but it did not always make him the most agreeable friend. "I will not deny the challenge I present. I wish you well in your quest to find what you seek. You are an upstanding fellow, and therefore acceptable as a suitor for my cousin." "And," Headley said with a full grin, "I will tread more cautiously than is my normal wont, for I have the advantage of knowing how you would respond to anyone who treated your cousin poorly." Richard laughed at the comment. "Perhaps that is the best reason for me to like you as a suitor for her." He was just about to ride away from his friend when a thought struck him. "You did not lead Miss Bennet to believe you were pursuing her in earnest, did you?" "Are you asking if I will damage her heart when I direct my attention to Miss de Bourgh?" "Yes." Headley shook his head. "No," he smiled. "Looking back on my interactions with her this afternoon as I pondered things, left me with the distinct impression that her heart was not available to be touched. I believe it has already been snared." He shook his head. "Lady Luck always did seem to shine more brightly on you than me. Not that I think being left to pursue your cousin instead of Miss Bennet is not being fortunate. I am just... well," he shrugged. "I will leave it at that." Richard watched his friend ride away. Georgiana's words from earlier today mixed with what Headley had just said, causing a smile to suffuse his expression. Mary liked him, but how was he supposed to gather the information he needed if Wellam was leaving town today? He supposed he would simply have to try Wellam's townhouse once again. He consulted his pocket watch. He would stop by Darcy House on his way and send a message with his cousins that he might be a trifle late arriving for dinner. Chapter 7. "So, you're saying that your sole purpose in calling on me is to tell me that you're going to be late to the gardeners?" Darcy's expression was one of amusement. "And this is because you must run Mr. Wellam aground before he sets sail for his estate, so that you can discover if he is pursuing Anne in earnest or not." Yes, that is it." Richard once again attempted to move toward the door to Darcy House, but Darcy matched his step and remained firmly in his path. "Have you taken up matchmaking?" his cousin teased. Richard huffed. "No, I just need to know if Anne's heart is being played with or not." That was partially true. He did want to know that. But more importantly, he wished to know whatever bit of information he and Mary were missing in their assessment, about those betrothal papers Lady Catherine had found. If he has been playing with Anne's heart, are you planning to call him out? Darcy's expression had turned serious. Richard shook his head. I will merely suggest that he make his position known to our cousin in the gentlest fashion available to him. And that is all there is to this. Darcy crossed his arms and levelled a pointed look at Richard. It was the sort of look that Richard's father always used when he suspected that what he was being told was not the whole of a matter. Richard swallowed and nodded. This has nothing to do with anything or anyone else. Darcy's left eyebrow had risen in question, along with his tone. As far as I know at this moment, no. That should both satisfy and arouse Darcy's already curious state. But it could involve others? The man had papers signed and discovered by our aunt, remember? Why would he go to such lengths if he was not truly planning to marry our cousin? His brow furrowed. That was an excellent question, and one which he would have to ponder as he rode to Wellam's townhouse. Now, if you would step aside, I have a mission to complete before I can dress for dinner and present myself at the gardener's. Why not just send your regrets? Darcy's amused expression had returned. I am certain they will not be utterly put out if you were not able to attend. I said I would be there. I'm a man of my word. You are. But sometimes things happen, and plans must change. Have you not said those very words to me in the past? Richard glowered at Darcy, and contemplated pushing the man aside and exiting without answering, but he did not. I want to be there. For what reason? Darcy had stepped closer and lowered his voice. Does it have anything to do with my wife's sister? Richard held Darcy's gaze for a moment. Yes, I've promised to share what I learn with her, since it was she who helped me discover what I have known since my meeting with Wickham, before your wedding. Let me see if I have this correct. You are saying that the only reason you wish to see Mary is to relay information? She's a friend, and I like dining with friends. Darcy stepped to the side as he chuckled. Bingley would not let you go so easily. You do remember how we tried to suggest that the two of you might get on well? Yes, I remember. And I still do not wish to have my future decided by a matchmaker. Not my mother, not Bingley, and not you. He placed his hat on his head with some force, since stomping out and slamming the door would only send his cousin into peals of laughter, and would be far too undignified for a man of his rank. As it was, Darcy's laugh still followed him out of the house. 10 minutes later, he found himself dismounting in front of Wellam's. And from the looks of things, he was not alone. In fact, if he were to be asked to put a wager on whose horse stood in front of the house and was not attached to the carriage being made ready, he would have to say Headley. But why would he be here? Could the man be discussing his plans to pursue Anne with Wellam? Did he not wish to step in where Wellam might already have a claim? Is Mr. Wellam still inside? He asked the groom who took his horse. Yes, sir, we do not leave until tomorrow. Richard's step faltered. Tomorrow, you say? Yes, sir. Not tonight? No, sir. Huh. That was curious. Headley had clearly said that Wellam was leaving today. He mounted the steps. All would be explained soon enough, he supposed. Colonel Fitzwilliam to see Mr. Wellam, he said, as he removed his hat and stepped inside the house when the door was opened. Fitzwilliam. Wellam stood at the door to his study just down the hall. What brings you to visit? He motioned for Richard to join him. You have been in town, but have not yet called on my cousin. I want to know why. Wellam chuckled. I do not know why I would call on a lady who has pushed me aside. Richard stopped walking. Pushed you aside? His brow furrowed. Anne? Pushed you aside? It was not unexpected, but yes. Wellam re-entered his study. What do you mean it was not unexpected? Richard hurried to follow him. Headley? So, he had been right when he had thought that the horse out front belonged to his friend. What brings you here? Did you and Wellam not have enough of a discussion at your club earlier? I have not been to my club in 3 days, Wellam said. Richard crossed his arms and glared at his friend. That is not what I was told. Headley simply smiled and took a sip from the glass of port he was holding. Is that so? Wellam did not sound as confused as one would expect, and that fact turned Richard's attention to him. It is. He took a seat that had not been offered to him and made himself comfortable. I do not need a drink. I have a dinner to attend in. He looked at his watch. Soon. Too soon. He was most assuredly going to be late. Ah, yes, with Miss Mary Bennet and her family. Wellam took a seat behind his desk. How do you know that? He looked from Wellam to Headley. "I may have mentioned it," Headley said. Richard wanted to know more about that, but he was here for a particular reason. Therefore, he turned his attention back to Wellham. "Do you have anything against Darcy?" "No, I still do not have anything against Darcy. I have already told you that I wanted to force the breaking of his betrothal, so that I could have a chance to court your cousin." Yes, I have heard that, but why—" His words halted as something Wellham had just said caught his attention. "How did you know the betrothal would be broken?" How had he missed that before? It was likely due to the fact that he thought he had all the answers he needed, and until today, he had had all the answers he needed. Wellham shuffled some papers on his desk. "A man does not put off marrying an heiress if he truly wishes to marry her." "No," Richard said with a shake of his head. "I do not believe that is the reason. Did Wickham tell you that it was a sham of a betrothal when you mentioned my cousin? Did you scheme with him to play with my cousin's heart?" Wellham's eyes were wide and filled with trepidation. "I am not the sort of fellow to play with any lady's heart, and most especially not a lady who is tied to either you or Darcy. I do not have a death wish." He blew out a breath as if resigning himself to an unpleasant task. "It seems as if I have no option but to tell you. She said you might discover the truth eventually." He shook his head. "However, we had thought that having gotten through the season last year we might have gotten away with things." "She? There was a female involved with this?" It appeared Mary's theory about Anne being involved in some fashion was correct. "Women are devious," Headley muttered. "I know that quite well." "Then you should prepare yourself for more wily female ways if you truly plan to pursue Mr. Borg," Wellham said to Headley, as things began to fall into place for Richard. "Are you telling me that my cousin had some part in this scheme involving that betrothal agreement?" He and Mary had suspected it was true, and yet it was still a shocking thought to have verified. "That is precisely what I am saying. I was given a sum of money that was to be divided between myself and Mr. Wickham. My portion was to cover my cooperation in calling on her and seeing to it that the papers were signed. Mr. Wickham, as you know, was paid for the signatures. My solicitor has a clerk who was willing to write up what needed to sound legal, and in a handwriting that could not be recognised as mine or Mr. Wickham's. It was a well thought out scheme, and not one I expected to be presented with while visiting my aunt in Hunsford. But there you have it." Richard allowed that information to settle into his mind. "Anne paid you to force Darcy to break a fictitious agreement?" Wellham nodded. "She said she saw no other way to make her mother realise that Darcy was never going to marry her. It was both sad and somewhat admirable that his cousin had been able to connive her way into freedom and a season." He chuckled. "That explains why she mentioned wishing to repay Darcy for the expense of her season." He looked at Headley. "You may wish to find another lady to court, or you might find yourself paying that bill." Headley shook his head and laughed. "If she is the lady who captures my heart and I capture hers, then it might be an expense worth paying, especially since I got to be here when the truth was revealed to you." He drained what was left in his glass and put it on the desk in front of him. "And that is why I am here. It is not often that I get to see you discover something after I have. I believe you bested me at just about everything in school." Richard shook his head. "How did you know about this?" Headley shrugged. "Miss Bennet." He rose as if he was getting ready to leave, as if that was going to happen without more being said. Had Mary not disclosed all she knew to him? "Explain yourself," Richard growled. "I believe you should ask her," Headley replied. "But before you do, you should know that I did not know all the details. I just knew that you would come to find them out." He moved a few steps towards the door. "Aside from seeing her at the ball and thinking that she was a lady I wanted to meet, I have not called on her with any expectations." His smile was somewhat sad. "What do you mean?" There seemed to be so much today that had his mind in a muddle. "Women are devious," he said with a half grin, "but some, such as the one I loved, are so to the harm of others, while others, such as Miss Bennet and even Mr. Borg, are so to the satisfaction of their heart without ever placing another in harm's way." His face scrunched. "Well, except, perhaps, for the funds that Darcy had to put out. Miss Bennet's motives, however, are pure." He gave a bow of his head and then gave his wishes for a safe trip and speedy work project to Wellham, and was gone. Chapter 8. He should have dressed for dinner. He knew he should have. but after hearing what Headley had said at Wellam's, he really could not be bothered to take the time for such things. Surely the Gardiners would allow him to dine with them, even if he was in the same suit he had worn earlier to call on Mary. And that was why he was here now, standing in the foyer at the Gardiner's house before entering the drawing room, attempting to straighten his jacket, the one which he had worn all day. Darcy would be shocked to see him so casually dressed, and there would be a price to pay for it, to be sure. However, he simply could not wait a moment longer to discover what role Miss Mary had played in all that had transpired today. "Colonel, are you planning to join us in the drawing room?" Mrs. Gardiner asked as she descended the steps to where he stood. "I would like to. Yes, but—" He paused. How did one ask this? "I had hoped to discuss a matter with Miss Mary. Apart from the others, it is about the ordeal that took place with Darcy's supposed betrothal to our cousin Anne. I am certain you have been made aware of what transpired there." Mrs. Gardiner smiled. "I do know a good deal about that particular thing." She tipped her head to the side. "Do you like her? Even just a little bit?" The questions were whispered. "I know I should not ask. She would be mortified to find out I had. But if I can spare her a rejection—" Her words trailed off. Richard swallowed. It was time to admit what he had come to realise. "I have never met a lady as delightful as your niece." "I am quite relieved to hear that." She did not need to tell him that, for he had seen her visibly relax at his words. "May I speak with her? I can ask permission to do so from your husband or Darcy if you prefer." "Do you plan to offer for her?" Did he? Was this the moment for such things? Did he not need to call on her as a suitor for a period of time before that? Was this what Darcy had meant when he spoke about how quickly his heart had claimed Elizabeth as its own? He shrugged. "It may come up." Mrs. Gardiner chuckled. "I will allow you to speak with Mary here, and we will not go into dinner until you have finished. However, I will need to whisper to the others about why Mary is out here with you." Richard nodded. "I understand." Just then he heard a loud laugh in the sitting room. "Is Bingley also here?" "He is. We have all three of our nieces here tonight." That made sense. It was a family dinner. But he had not thought that Bingley would be here. Oh, there was going to be far more teasing to endure than he had expected. Not that he did not expect to have to face Bingley's teasing about Miss Mary eventually. However, he had hoped it would be far, far down the road of time. "I will send Mary out as discreetly as possible." "Thank you, madame." Richard paced a small circle in the narrow foyer as he waited. He pulled at his sleeves and lined up the buttons on his waistcoat, and was just wondering if he should attempt to retie his cravat when Mary joined him. "I must apologise for not having changed my clothes," he said, as he took in how pretty she was in her blue frock. "I did not find Mr. Wellam until it was too late to return home without being dreadfully late and not being able to speak to you before we ate." "What you're wearing is fine." She stopped his hand from smoothing his sleeve for the third time. He was as nervous now as he had been when he faced his first duty as a colonel leading a group of men in a drill. He really needed to rein in his emotions. What had become of him lately? "What did you discover from Mr. Wellam?" Mary asked when he did not immediately launch into what he was to say, because he was too caught in his own thoughts. "It was Anne, just as you suspected. She set up the whole scheme to see herself free from the idea of being Mrs. Darcy. She hired Mr. Wellam to have the papers drawn up, and then she told him that perhaps a fellow named Wickham might be able to sign them convincingly, since he was familiar with both Mr. Darcy's and was known to be dishonest. That part he had discovered after Headley had left Wellam's. Mr. Wellam had his solicitor's clerk draw up the documents, and then it was just the matter of finding Wickham that took a bit of time. And, returning to Rosings, so Mr. Bore could help her mother discover the papers, Mary concluded. "Exactly. We were correct then?" "We were, though I suspect you knew more about this than I did, when I was attempting to discover what I have just shared." She tucked her bottom lip between her teeth as she smiled, and sucked in a sharp breath. "Oh my, this has been quite the fascinating intrigue, has it not been?" Pure delight shone in her expression. He chuckled. "Marry me." He suspected there was no other lady in the whole world who would find an intrigue like this one so exhilarating. Her mouth popped open in surprise. "What did you say?" Her lips tipped up on one side as if she were pleased with herself. And at that very moment Headley's comments from earlier about devious ladies found their mark. "Is that what this has all been about? Have you tricked me into offering for you?" Merriment danced in her eyes. "I am sure I had nothing to do with your cousin scheming her way out of a fake engagement." She ducked her head. "However, I will admit to entering into the scheme to discover the truth, for more reasons than just to know the truth." He shook his head. "Were you matchmaking?" One shoulder lifted and lowered. "I needed to know if you would allow me to be, well, me. Have you ever attended a party where a pretend crime is played out, and everyone must decipher who is the culprit?" He shook his head. "No, I have not. But I have heard about them." She sighed. "I would love to attend one. I've wanted to since the moment I first discovered there was such a thing. I find small mysteries to be delightful puzzles to solve. Not just any gentleman would appreciate such a lady. Marry me, and we will host one of those parties every year." He took her hands in his. "Are you only asking me to marry you because I can solve riddles?" He shook his head. "No, I believe you accomplished your other goal, of snaring my heart while solving the riddle of the betrothal papers. That is why I must marry you." He tugged her a step closer to him. "Of course. I would love to know exactly how you schemed to get Headley to be at Wellam's house today when I came seeking answers. Was he there?" Her eyes did not grow wide, declaring her look of surprise to be utterly feigned. "As you well knew he would be. Now kindly explain." Her eyes sparkled with delight. "But where is the fun in that, Colonel?" "Will you always keep secrets from me, my love?" At that endearment, true surprise enveloped her full expression, from lips to eyes. She shook her head as a soft smile overspread her features. "No, I will not." That was enough of an answer for him. He would discover the details of how she had schemed her way to this question later. For now he would be content to know that she had not been satisfied to just be good friends, but had taken it upon herself to manoeuvre her way into being something far more dear. "Then allow me to ask you a third time. Will you marry me?" She nodded. "It would be rather poor of me to refuse since it was my goal." She drew the left corner of her bottom lip between her teeth. He could see apprehension in her eyes as she whispered, "And because I love you." He expelled a breath, while joy as soft as a feather and as deep as the ocean settled into his heart. Then he gathered her to him and kissed her, stirring within himself a desire to always be so intimately bound to her. "I say, we're getting hungry. Can you not kiss her later?" Mary gasped while Richard growled. "Bingley?" "I believe it was he who said that you would get on well together," Darcy said. Both of them were standing in the doorway to the drawing room and were wearing grins which were very undignified in how wide they were. "Your mother will be pleased to hear that you have finally taken her advice and found a lady to marry. I do assume you are marrying her." Darcy gave him a pointed look. "Of course he is." Mary lifted her chin. Her cheeks were flaming red, and her hand held his most firmly. "I am not the sort of lady to kiss just any old gentleman." "He is old," Bingley muttered. "He is perfect," Mary retorted. "Yes," Elizabeth said as she and Georgiana joined them in the entrance hall. "He's quite dashing in his red coat. Mother will be pleased." "And he's smart enough to not be pushed into marrying anyone," Georgiana added, "and yet soft-hearted enough to be drawn along to the desired end." Richard scowled. "Did you know that she was drawing me along in a scheme?" "We all knew," Darcy answered. "Well, not at first, but eventually we did. And your mother knows too." "What?" Richard cried and looked at Mary in bewilderment. He had found her clever since their first meeting, but this was something impressive. "Staging the perfect campaign requires just the right allies," Mary said to him, before turning to the others. "I did not draw him along. I simply put myself forward." "I do not see how those are different things," Richard grumbled. "However, I will not prolong our going into dinner to argue the point. Instead, I will only say that I would like to hear all the details while we eat." "That is an excellent idea," Mrs. Gardiner said, as her husband shook Richard's hand and welcomed him into the family. And so, they all went into dinner. The Gardiners, the Bingleys, the Darcys, and eventually, after another delicious kiss, the future Fitzwilliams. And as the meal was served and enjoyed, Richard discovered all the twists and turns of how Mary had first engaged him in discussion about a forged document to how, just last night during a dance, she had enlisted Mr. Headley's help. As Richard listened to how his friend had willingly joined in the game to see Mary gain her heart's desire, and had found some fun in leading Richard down a merry chase for answers today, he knew that being married to Mary was going to be the best adventure of his life. For when it came to forming a plan and seeing it to its happy conclusion, there was none so accomplished as Mary. You have been listening to None So Accomplished as Mary, Sweet Extras, Book 5, written by Leanie Brown, narrated by Christopher, an authorized voice replica. The 2025 copyright for None So Accomplished as Mary is held by Leanie Brown. All rights reserved.